I'm Errol Barnett in Johannesburg, South Africa. This is CNN.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, October the 8th. I'm Nina Dos Santos at CNN London.
And I'm Pauline Chu in Hong Kong. Welcome to World Business Today.
First up, we're covering all aspects of the U.S. government shutdown today. Washington remains in deadlock and the uncertainty is now being felt on Wall Street. And in the meantime, the U.S. is taking some heat from leaders at the APEC summit right about this, while citizens at home grow more and more frustrated with the bickering that's going on Capitol Hill.
We'll dive into all of the business angles of the shutdown, but first, here are the top news stories that we're following at CNN. APEC nations say global trade is weakening. In a joint statement at the close of their summit in Bali today, the 21 nations declared economic growth was, quote, likely to be slower and less balanced than desired, but they would tailor their policies to maintain stability. The president of Argentina is expected to have surgery today after doctors found a blood clot on the surface of her brain. The decision was made after Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner felt a tingling sensation in her left arm and also after she lost some muscle strength. In Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, a march by thousands of striking teachers ended in violence. The teachers are demanding better pay. Many were also protesting what some say was excessive force used by police at a similar demonstration a week ago.
But going back to the big story that's got a lot of people worrying on the markets, the U.S. government shutdown has now entered its second week. Almost 500,000 federal employees are off work. Investors are on edge, as you'd imagine. And U.S. President Barack Obama and Republican House Speaker John Boehner still aren't talking to each other these days. However, they are talking about each other. On Monday, Boehner accused the president of refusing to talk to Republicans yet again. Mr. Obama, on the other hand, reiterated that he wouldn't negotiate with Congress while the Republicans were threatening to tip the country into a default. Well, that, however, is the danger if Congress doesn't manage to agree over the next 10 days to come to raise the country's debt ceiling. This is the legal limit on the government's total borrowing. The Obama administration has said that it wants to raise it for a year, but on Monday, officials hinted that the president could perhaps be flexible on that point. Jim Acosta has all the roundup.
I'm here at FEMA for a couple of reasons.
In the eye of a shutdown storm that's still raging, President Obama stopped by FEMA to point out the agency is grappling with national disasters with a furloughed workforce and to accuse House Speaker John Boehner of blocking a vote that would reopen the government.
My very strong suspicion is that there are enough votes there. And the reason that Speaker Boehner hasn't called a vote on it is because he doesn't apparently want to see the government shutdown end at the moment.
But there could be a few breaks in the clouds over Washington. The president promised to work with Republicans on health care and the budget if they end the shutdown and raise the nation's debt ceiling.
I am eager and ready to sit down and negotiate with Republicans on a whole range of issues.
Another hopeful sign? With a potential default on October 17th fast approaching, White House officials said the president is willing to accept a short-term increase in the debt limit instead of raising it for 1 year, as most Democrats prefer.
I'm simply saying that we have never stated, and we're not saying today, that a debt ceiling ought to be or can be any particular length of time. So I'm not ruling out a specific duration, and I want to make that clear.
But Republicans complain it's the president who's risking default by not negotiating, pointing to this comment made by White House economic advisor Gene Sperling.
The president strongly believes that if he were to sanction negotiations with those threatening default, that would actually increase, not decrease, the chances that we as a country undermine our full faith and credit.
Sperling went on to say the president believes such negotiations would only encourage more brinkmanship. But Boehner had this interpretation.
This morning, a senior White House official said that the president would rather default than to sit down and negotiate. Really?
A new CNN ORC poll finds Americans are furious over the shutdown, with 63% angry with Republicans, 57% with Democrats, and 53% with the president. What's worse, nobody in Washington seems to know what might happen if the nation goes into default next week.
I can't tell you. We've never gotten to this point. It's very dangerous.
As for that idea of a short-term debt ceiling increase, a top House Republican aide said that would have to go along with some spending cuts. But at this point, White House officials say that is not going to happen. Jim Acosta, CNN, the White House.
As Jim was reporting, Americans are not happy at all about the effect all of this is having on the country. A lot of federal workers who were at first told to stay home have now been told to come back to work. The Defense Department has called hundreds of thousands of civilian employees back in after initially classifying them as non-essential. And over the weekend, the House of Representatives passed a bill to ensure furloughed federal workers get their pay once this shutdown is over. Now, that means around $200 million a day could find its way back to staff who've been stood down and also back into the economy. All sorts of private companies, however, are still feeling the effect of the shutdown. Take Boeing, for example. It is still making new planes but can't deliver them because government inspectors from the Federal Aviation Authority are technically off the job. The FAA says it is planning to call some of them back to work pretty soon. Well, it was a downbeat session for U.S. stock markets on Monday because of what's happening on Capitol Hill, and all three major indices closed almost 1% lower. For the most part, Wall Street had managed to shrug off the shutdown over the past few days, but after Monday's losses, the Dow and the S&P 500, as you can see, are at their lowest levels in about 1 month. Nina.
Yeah, the thing that investors really hate is uncertainty, isn't it? We're a little over an hour into the trading session here in Europe, and again, that shutdown in the United States entering its second week is very much in the forefront of investors' minds, despite the fact that we've had all sorts of patchy points of economic data coming out across the region. Data for this market, Germany over there, has been showing that imports and exports in August were both lower than a year ago. Exports, which is, of course, the big economic locomotive of the biggest economy in the Eurozone, those exports were down by more than 5%. So that's a worrying sign that the recovery here may be faltering a little bit in Germany. France's trade deficit also narrowed just slightly in the month of August to $6.7 billion. But again, nothing to write home about. That market down by almost the most in the Eurozone, as you can see. But the FTSE 100 also down around about 0.25%, despite the fact that we've had a government reshuffle, which has pushed a number of prominent figures closer towards the Treasury. Still hasn't really countered the downbeat sentiment coming from Washington.
Well, Nina, the Asian-Pacific markets ended the session mostly up today despite the U.S. gridlock on Capitol Hill and also despite a lower open after Wall Street's losses from Monday. The Shanghai Composite reopened today after a week-long holiday, and as you can see, it ended up by more than 1%. Retailers and property developers rose on holiday sales over the past week. The Hang Seng was also up today by about 0.9%, buoyed by gains in casino stocks. Barclays says gaming revenues in Macau were up, no doubt from many mainland Chinese gamblers coming to Macau during Golden Week. Now, the main Aussie benchmark, however, ended the session down by almost 0.25%. The U.S. debt ceiling still worrying investors there in Australia, and it also dragged down commodity prices, so resource shares were lower. The Nikkei, as I mentioned, ended up by about 0.3%. The dollar strengthened against the yen, which helped exporters, but the current account surplus for the month of August actually came in below expectations.
Yeah, dollar also strengthening against the British pound for a number of days now. But it's not just investors who've had enough of the deadlock in Washington. Business leaders are also hoping that lawmakers will manage to get their act together soon.
The debt ceiling really doesn't make any sense. It makes absolutely no sense to let it be used as a lever for other things. I mean, if you want to change the laws on abortion or immigration or you name it, tax laws, whatever, let that be a piece of legislation that people hammer out. But to tie it to something about whether you break the promises of the United States government to people all over the world, as well as its own citizens, just makes no sense. So it ought to be banned as a weapon. I mean, it should be like a nuclear bomb.
We're going to have a thundering crisis. We're going to have debt ceiling crises. We're going to have CR crises. We're going to have multi-thousand-point market meltdowns before the dreamwalkers in the Beltway down there wake up and realize they have to deal with reality.
Congress has a lower approval rating than colonoscopies, which are important and save lives, let's be clear. Clear that we as citizens are frustrated. And one of the things and one of the reasons why I was so compelled to write the book was that I feel this technology can be a way for us to actually get a government that is more responsive and responsible to us.
Citizens and business leaders in the United States, they're very much frustrated Well, the US Treasury Secretary Jack Lew says that Congress is, quote, playing with fire if it doesn't decide to extend the debt limit. The official debt ceiling deadline is coming up on October the 17th. That's just 1 week from Thursday, Pauline.
So we are watching the calendar very closely. You're watching World Business Today. Coming up next, some tough talk for Washington from Singapore's Prime Minister. Find out why he thinks the shutdown is just the beginning of America's political turmoil.
Winning Post, in association with Longines.
As one of the most accomplished jockeys in the world, Olivier Pellier has tasted big race success over the last 2 decades. The 40-year-old has also been champion jockey 4 times in his native France. I caught up with him near his home in Chantilly, just outside Paris, where he's preparing for racing's most coveted prize. So 2 days out from the race, what do you like to do to prepare or even relax ahead of the race?
I play paintball.
You play paintball?
Yes. I play paintball for relax, so now I show you how to play.
Really?
You come with me? Yes, you. Francesca, where are you?
Winning Post, in association with Longines.
Welcome back to World Business Today, live from Hong Kong and London. The president of Indonesia is calling on members of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, to pull together and play a role in global economic growth. Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono was speaking on the final day of the APEC summit on the Indonesian island of Bali. He emphasized the need for trade cooperation, as well as the need to increase security of supplies in areas like food, energy, and water. Well, CNN's Anna Korn joins us now from Bali for more on the APEC summit. Anna, we just heard about what the Indonesian president had summarized as the main points from his perspective, but there are 21 countries there at APEC. What kind of consensus did they come to?
Well, Pauline, I think the president of Indonesia, as you say, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, he did say that the region as a whole needed to enhance food, energy and water security, but he certainly did herald the APEC summit as a success. I think the theme from all APEC leaders was a resilient Asia-Pacific, and that it will remain the engine of global growth. They said that they wanted to support multilateral trading systems, connectivity, sustainable growth. Obviously, APEC will be meeting again next year in China. Look, I think the ultimate goal is that they would like to create a free and open trade bloc within the entire Asia-Pacific before 2020. Whether that's achieved obviously remains to be seen, but everyone is working towards that. You know, nothing particularly concrete comes out of these summits, but it's certainly an opportunity for world leaders to get together to talk and to strengthen relationships politically as well as economically.
Yeah, and Anna, one of the vehicles to promote more trade is the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Not all of the countries there at APEC are part of this. It's really selected countries like the U.S., Canada, Mexico, Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, part of this. And this is a free trade zone. And there have been discussions about this for the past 3 years or so. I know there were discussions about this there at APEC. What's the feeling about how this will all pull together?
Yeah, it's been happening really on the sidelines of APEC because, you know, Indonesia's not involved, China's certainly not involved. 12 countries, as you mentioned, and yeah, these talks have been going on now for 3 years. Very much US-led, and President Barack Obama was going to really be pushing that at the APEC summit. Obviously, his absence, being forced to stay in Washington due to the government shutdown, a big blow to the TPP, although his replacement announcement, US Secretary of State John Kerry certainly said that they were on track to achieve the deadline by the end of the year. But there are countries within the bloc, within those 12 countries, like who are putting up some barriers, a bit of resistance. So as to whether they will actually get that trading bloc through by that deadline remains to be seen. The outstanding issues, the sticking issues, if you like, intellectual property, state-owned enterprises, labour and environment. So these are some of the issues that perhaps could hold back the TPP, in actual fact, being formed. But if it does, it will establish a free trade bloc that will stretch from Vietnam to Chile to Japan, include 800 million people. That's like a third of the world's trade and 40% of global economy. So they hope to consider, I should say, continue talks at the WTO meeting, which will be also taking place here in Bali in December. Pauline.
Yeah, you mentioned there is some resistance. Even within Japan, there are some heavy, strong lobbies like the auto sector and the agricultural sector that are resisting to parts of the TPP. Anna Corin there covering the APEC summit from Bali. Thank you very much, Anna. Nina.
Pauline, officials attending APEC have had more than just the Asia-Pacific region on their agenda. They've, of course, been concerned about what's going on in the United States. The partial shutdown of the government there has been a key talking point at the summit in Bali this week. CNN's Patricia Wu sat down with the Prime Minister of Singapore, no less, and he wasn't shy about criticising Washington over the lawmakers' deadlock. Here's what he had to say.
I'm not worried about the impact on the GDP on the U.S. They calculate 0.1%, 0.2%. If it's a week, it's so much. If it's 2 weeks, it's a little bit more. The dollar amount is not consequential. But the signal that the Americans are unable to get their act together and can't vote money to run the government and can't agree that the government needs to be run and has national interest greater than the Tea Party or the Democrats or the Republicans, I think that's a negative signal, which will last much longer than the shutdown.
Are you more concerned about the debt ceiling?
Well, that's another negative signal if you hit it, because it just confirms that you can't resolve the practical problems, which should not be practical problems. I mean, these are problems which you have created for yourself in a game of chicken.
Singapore's lawmakers are some of the highest paid in the world. Do you think that if Washington's lawmakers were better compensated, there would not be so much dysfunction?
First of all, we may have competitive salaries, but we are far from being the richest lawmakers in the world. I think we operate in a clean system, an honest system. We pay people what their job is worth and what the quality of people is worth, and we expect them to perform. And if they don't, well, they have to go, or the electorate will vote them out.
I think that's part of the problem, that they would attract better talent in Washington if their salaries are more competitive?
I think you have a lot of idealistic people who want to do good, who would be prepared to come forward. Of course, there are many hindrances to coming forward, and not everybody enjoys going through a congressional confirmation process. But there are people who will come forward. I think what is not good is because of the influence of what will come next. As a revolving door leads to complicated conflicts of interest. And so does, depending on interest groups to fund congressional campaigns. You have restrictions, but now there are many ingenious ways around them, some blessed by the Supreme Court. And that means that money speaks, which is a big problem in the system, which many of your own people acknowledge.
China recently opened its Shanghai Free Trade Zone. It's small now, an experiment, but if it spreads to other parts of China, how concerned are you about stiff competition there?
Well, if the whole of China becomes like Shanghai, of course the world has changed. If the whole of China becomes like Hong Kong, the world will have changed even more. I think the Shanghai Free Trade Zone is an experiment. I'm not sure how the Chinese intend to play it. I think they will feel their way forward. It will be I suspect it will be something more than Shanghai, but not quite as far as Hong Kong has gone. And then if it succeeds, I'm sure they will learn that they will take the lessons to the rest of China. But it's not easy to do, because a special economic zone for factories, it's a confined space. You You make the rules of factories there, the factory abides by the rules of factory exports. And it can be different from the rest of China. But financial services, do the rules apply to that zone, or do the rules apply to that zone doing business across the whole of China?
That was Singapore's Prime Minister Lee there, as you can see, a man who's very concerned about the impact of the polarised politics in the United States. And that's a view that's also been shared by several other leaders around the course of this week. We'll bring you more views from the sidelines of the APEC summit a little later on the show, so do stay with us for that.
Well, in the meantime, Asia's rising middle classes are driving change. HSBC says that means a surge in global trade is coming, and it's all about the materials and the machinery needed for infrastructure development. The bank's head of global trade will tell us where the opportunities lie in just a moment.
FaceTime on Marketplace Europe in association with Germany Trade and Invest.
You know, for 700, 800 years, Serbia has always been the East in the West and the West in the East. We've always been somewhere in between. And that is why EU accession is a key strategic goal for Serbia. In the same breath, we would like to protect and nurture the old alliances and friendships, such as the friendship we have with Russia or the friendship we have with China. And we'd also like to make new friends, friends we may not have had in the past, like Germany.
FaceTime on Marketplace Europe in association with Germany Trade and Invest.
Witchdeck Roofing, changing the roofs of Africa. Powered by AHI Roofing New Zealand, pioneers of stone-coated roofs around the world. AHI Roofing is owned by Fletcher Building, which has over 100 years history in producing building products of excellent quality. Fletcher Building became the largest company listed in the New Zealand Stock Exchange in 2010. Witchdeck Roofing, changing the roofs of Africa.
The Taliban tried to kill her for going to school. They only made her stronger. Her name is Malala, and she talks to CNN's Christiane Amanpour. Her story, her future, her dreams. The bravest girl in the world. Monday on CNN. CNN News Center. Tonight on CNN.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the land of FC Barcelona, where ground temperature is currently excited, reaching feverish around kickoff. The weather was brought to you by Qatar Airways, proud partner of FC Barcelona.
Welcome back to World Business Today. Global trade that's related to infrastructure is expected to triple in the next 2 decades. A new report from HSBC says trade in materials and machinery needed for development projects will grow at a pace of around 9% each year from now through 2030. That sounds pretty incredible. Infrastructure-based trade currently makes up around 45% of global exports. HSBC expects that number to rise to 54% by 2030. It says emerging markets led by China and India will be among the main importers of goods for projects ranging from factory production to building ports and railways. Let's get more on this report to find out where the opportunities lie. James Emmett is HSBC's global head of trade, and he joins us now live from the studio there in HSBC on the other side of Hong Kong. James, good to see you. It's a fascinating report. One major shift that you're seeing is actually India overtaking the U.S. in terms of demand for building materials by 2020. That sounds pretty surprising. Why do you see that?
Well, Pauline, that's really focused around infrastructure investment.
Clearly, there's a very significant demand in India for infrastructure investment. But what we've done is we split infrastructure into two parts. And this is effectively the value-added investment for productivity, so infrastructure such as machinery, robotics, and so on. And there we're seeing China really taking a very leading position. And in infrastructure for roads, railroads, bridges, and so on, India overtakes the US by 2030. So it's a story where overall, though, you see that very significant growth in infrastructure investment really as part of merchandise trade. And I think this is going to be a key story as we look forward to 2030.
Okay, so you're looking at infrastructure investment with equipment, heavy machinery, and then you also look at infrastructure materials like building goods. Where does China come in and its push for urbanization in your report?
Yeah, I think that is an absolutely key part. Both urbanization and demographics in China are fundamental to some of the growth that we're seeing in this story. You can see that both in China as an investor, but increasingly, rather an importer, but increasingly an importer of these value-added investment goods. So what you're seeing, if you, for example, look at southern China, is a move in terms of up the value chain for manufacturing, and that requires heavier investment in infrastructure in the manufacturing sector, but it also requires the urbanization infrastructure, railroads, subways, and so on.
I imagine all of this is really good news for countries that supply machinery and equipment, countries like Germany and the U.S., but will they face a lot of competition from emerging markets that are trying to develop their own technical expertise?
I think that's a really important point. And yes, what you see for Germany, for example, is that China takes over as the leading export nation for Germany, overtaking France by 2030. France is currently the #1 export partner for Germany. And that really reflects the exports of Germany. But if you look, for example, at Poland, what you'll see there is that increasingly Chinese exports to Poland of this type of equipment are going to be competitive. So there's a key story here for those developed markets, which is that they themselves have to continue investing to ensure productivity, expertise, skills, and indeed output is such that they can compete at that higher value-added level.
James Emmett, thank you very much. It was a really fascinating report. We didn't quite get to the other countries I wanted to talk to about, like Malaysia, Vietnam, and Korea, because you also see some potential there in the next couple of years. But for now, thank you very much. That's James Emmett there from HSBC. Nina.
Pauline, you're watching World Business Today. While up next, the US government shutdown has forced workers to stay home and close national parks in the United States to tourists. But it's also having an impact far beyond America's own borders. We'll be taking a look at the consequences for the world's emerging markets. That's next.
In the business of bringing joy, Kirloskar goes much beyond enriching lives.
Information is knowledge, information is power, information is security. And I strongly believe our viewers, people all over the world, have real questions of their own. They want to know what's happening in their world, what it means to them, how it'll affect them. And so it's really up to us, once we get elected officials or anybody in public positions in front of us, to keep up the persistence to get out of them really what we're searching for.
Christiane Amanpour, asking questions that help you make sense of the world. Amanpour, tonight on CNN. CNN News Center, tonight on CNN. It's life in the fast lane, in the cars, and off the track. Stay ahead of the pack with The Circuit on CNN. Track the business behind the billions fueling the sport. And keep up with Formula One, the drivers, and its legends. This weekend, get the latest news and standings from Japan on The Circuit with CNN. All weekend in world sport, in association with DHL. This month on CNN Go, plunge into Dubai. From palm-shaped islands to the world's tallest building.
It's just absolutely amazing.
we travel through desert landscapes and dine at one of the world's finest restaurants. Explore the glitz and glamour of Dubai in a luxury edition of CNN Go. Wednesday on CNN. In association with Korean Air.
I'm Jim Bitterman in Paris, and this is CNN.
Live from CNN Hong Kong, I'm Pauline Chu.
And from CNN London, I'm Nina Dos Santos. A warm welcome back, everyone, to World Business Today. Let's have a look at how the markets are faring midway through the week. As you can see at the moment, it is a bit of a sea of red. A lot of concerns about the US shutdown, but really the US debt ceiling that could see the United States default, perhaps even on its interest payments on its bonds. That's really what's got people worried. But I might also point out that it hasn't been helped by worsening trade data coming out of Germany and also France. When it comes to the German import and export balance, it also indicates that exports in August were at their lowest level for more than a year ago. And that really is concerning people because, of course, Germany is the biggest exporter in this region. A lot of people were counting on Germany to be the locomotive to drag it out of its recent travails. Pauline?
Well, Nina, here in the Asia-Pacific region, we saw a different picture where the market seemed to shrug off what was going on Capitol Hill, and we saw more value buying after losses from yesterday. So most of the major indices ended the session up today. The Shanghai Composite reopened today after a week-long holiday that was called Golden Week, so they were playing catch-up a little bit, ending up by 1%. Retailers and property developers rose on holiday sales over the past week. The Hang Seng also ended up by about 0.9%. And we saw gains in casino stocks. No surprise that a lot of gamblers from mainland China headed to casino over the past couple of days. And Barclays says that gaming revenue in Macau was up. The main Aussie benchmark, however, bucked the trend today. It was down by about 0.25%. The U.S. debt ceiling concerns did drag down the commodity sector. So we saw the resource shares, the general sector, going lower. The Nikkei was up today as the dollar strengthened against the yen, which always helps Japanese exporters there. But the current account surplus for the month of August did come in below expectations. And let's get back to our top story right now, the U.S. government shutdown and the debt ceiling dilemma. After weeks without a hint of compromise, there is a sign the White House may be open to a short-term increase in the nation's debt limit, and that has the potential to pull the U.S. government back from that brink of default. And when it comes to the shutdown, U.S. House Speaker John Boehner insists Republicans will not pass a spending bill they don't like in order to reopen the government, but U.S. President Barack Obama and other Democrats reject that.
The speaker goes on national television and says he doesn't have the votes. Well, put it up for a vote. Let's see. I mean, they said they had the votes on the Farm Bill, and they couldn't get the votes. These guys can't count if they don't think they've got the votes. If in the light of day we have a vote, we're absolutely confident that we will have a majority. And if the speaker's afraid of democracy, we all have a problem. We're just saying, Mr. Speaker, call a vote. If you vote and we have a majority, we can open the government now.
Some senior Republicans also believe it's time to end the deadlock. Senator John McCain says some lawmakers are prolonging the process.
One of the problems is it's no longer Republican versus Democrat sit down and negotiate. There's the third element here, as you know, and that is a significant number in the House of Representatives who believe that we should have no negotiations until there's an agreement to defund Obamacare, which is not going to happen until we have 67 Republican Senate votes that would override a presidential veto.
Well, the whole world is watching Washington. This is, in fact, a live shot of the White House at 4:33 a.m. in the morning. And the fallout from the federal shutdown is already being felt by the U.S. government's biggest creditor, which is, of course, China. China holds more than $1 trillion in U.S. treasuries, and now Beijing is starting to worry about its own investments. With the partial shutdown now into week 2, well, the Chinese vice finance minister made an urgent appeal to Washington.
We ask that the United States earnestly take steps to resolve in a timely way the political issues around the debt ceiling and prevent a U.S. debt default by October 17th to ensure the safety of Chinese investments in the U.S. and the global economic recovery. This is the U.S.'s responsibility.
The prospect not just of the shutdown, but the US running out of money to pay its bills is casting a shadow over the world's emerging markets. Let's bring in our emerging markets editor, John Defterios, and start out by talking about what some of these economic powers are suggesting, John.
Yeah, it's interesting, Nina, that you heard from the Vice Finance Minister, Mr. Zhu. He's the same official who spoke before the G20 summit in equally blunt language. Let's call this the calm before a potential storm, because that's what we're facing right now. And these briefings are coming ahead of the IMF World Bank meetings taking place in Washington. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But it's the debt ceiling that now the emerging markets are focused on, and the number 3 economy now, and that is Japan. We heard from President Xi before he went to the APEC summit. Then he had his Vice Prime Minister speak. Shinzo Abe is suggesting from Japan, and he did the same before the G20 summit, that there are concerns that the U.S. is not taking this seriously enough. So they're suggesting we had the roadblock and the government shutdown the first week of October. Can we really go to October 17th and hit that debt ceiling and have the U.S. default? And the percentage chances are starting to rise as they listen to their rhetoric. Now, let's take a chart here, Nina, of a comparison between the MSCI since May of this year through to October, and the S&P 500, of course, the main index for the United States. This is misleading, and I'll tell you why. Up 4% in that period, the S&P 500 up 5.25%. This index dropped 7% in the month of June after the U.S. talked about tapering the Federal Reserve, starting that process. Then in September, they backed off of that, as you know, Nina, and the market index rose 8% in the month of September. So the emerging markets have been seeing drastic instability, and there's greater concern about the large emerging markets like Brazil, India, and Turkey, unable to adjust their economies if the headwinds blow from Washington on the debt ceiling, on the stalemate with regards to the debt right now, and also if the Federal Reserve decides to taper off. So it's been relatively calm, Nina, but we can't bank on that right now, particularly as we go into this uncertain period before the expiration of the deadline on October 17th.
Yeah, all of this gives the World Bank and the IMF plenty to talk about ahead of its autumn meetings, which kick off later today. The IMF has its own concerns about China, doesn't it? The world's second largest economy. What's behind all of that?
Well, that's very interesting. Both the IMF and the World Bank have expressed their own concerns. And in fact, Christine Lagarde, the managing director, last week, before they released the World Economic Outlook, which comes out later today, was suggesting that the emerging markets, as a result of Federal Reserve Board policy changes that may be coming later this year, could see their growth knocked off by 0.5 percentage point or 1%. Then the World Bank, in its emerging market update ahead of the meetings in Washington, were suggesting, can China sustain the level of investment? Over the last 5 years, since the financial crisis of 2008, Nina, they've been spending 12% of GDP on investment, particularly into state-owned enterprises. Has it been efficient? Has it boosted productivity? The answer is no. And the real question for 2014, can they sustain it? And that raises the question mark for the number 2 economy. Can China deliver 7.5% growth in 2014, which is the target for the government right now? So a number of headwinds, not the panic of 5 years ago in 2008 when they met in Washington before the collapse of Lehman Brothers, but again, big concerns whether the United States will take this seriously, the concerns from other G20 members to deal with the crisis that they have, the stalemate in Washington, Nina.
Yeah, and if they're not making as much money in the economy and they're not making as much money on their treasury bills, well, yeah, you can bet China will certainly have a bit of a think about its finances this week. Thanks so much for that, John Defterios, our emerging markets editor in Abu Dhabi. And I have an apology to make, Pauline. I accidentally called the Capitol building the White House. But of course I know the difference. I didn't mean that.
Yes, and we do know it's still early in the morning, so we'll just get you a cup of coffee, but of course we know you know that. Well, there are some people in the U.S. who think it would be a smart idea, actually, to not raise the debt ceiling come October 17th. In a poll by CNN and ORC, 38% said to leave the limit as is. But if that actually happened, lawmakers would have to choose to do one of the following: cut what the government calls discretionary spending by 33%, cut mandatory spending, which includes things like Social Security, by 16%, or raise tax revenue by 12%. None of these would be very popular with most Americans. It's hard to imagine any of those getting overwhelming approval. And many taxpayers in the U.S. state of Indiana, which is right there in the Midwest, have been weighing in on the congressional stalemate. CNN's Ted Rowlands headed to the town of Gary, where people know what it means to be strong every day when there's very little money to go around.
Driving through downtown Gary, Indiana, you see how much this city is struggling. Ravaged by the housing bust and high unemployment, people here have very little patience for lawmakers bickering in Washington.
I think it's all bull, man. You know, it's power struggles, money struggles. It's ridiculous. The people suffering, you know, so what could you say?
What message would you send to Washington?
That they need to work for us and listen to us and work together. Both parties have to work together and quit blaming each other.
Feel what the people feel, you know, put yourself in our shoes, you know, especially low class, you know, middle class. Put yourself in our shoes.
What word would you use to describe what's happening in Washington?
Hideous. Hideous.
This private construction crew is clearing a lot downtown. The project is with the county, but it's funded in part with federal dollars. A long shutdown means a possible delay in getting their paychecks.
Democrats and Republicans, I think it's a shame that they can't get their act together and work as a team and put this country back where it needs to be.
Describe what's happening in Washington in one word.
Madness.
Vindictive.
Petty. It's very petty for them to do what they're doing. They're not worried about their constituents. They're worried about themselves.
And that is just one of the many adjectives we have heard over the past week in different cities around the Midwest. It's safe to say that as this continues, people across the country are going to be even more frustrated with lawmakers in Washington. Ted Rowlands, CNN, Gary, Indiana.
Well, the Capitol Hill standoff grinds on. The new $100 bill has finally hit circulation in the United States. It will be circulating as of today after a delay of 3 years. CNN's Richard Quest spoke to a member of the design team who worked on the long-awaited debut of the new and improved C-Note. Sonia Danberg is a senior financial services analyst for the Federal Reserve Board.
We redesign our currency for security reasons to stay ahead of counterfeiting threats. So it's a proactive rather than a reactive news. We have relatively low rates of counterfeiting for U.S. currency. So on this base of over $1 trillion worth of Federal Reserve notes in circulation, less than 1/100% of that is reported as counterfeit every year. But we take each one of those instances really seriously because, of course, it represents an economic loss.
Well, you can catch the whole interview at around about that new $100 bill and get a glimpse of the new bill itself on Quest Means Business. That's around about 4 p.m. if you're watching from New York, 9 p.m. in the evening if you're here in London.
It's ironic that we may be seeing those $100 bills when the U.S. may be running out of money soon. Well, in other news now, a flawless white diamond has been sold for a record $30 million. It went on the auction block on Monday at Sotheby's here in Hong Kong. Now, for 6 minutes, 2 phone bidders battled over this 118-carat oval stone. It is the largest diamond graded by America's Gem Institute, and a Sotheby's expert that we spoke to yesterday said it's the size of an egg. It broke the record price paid for this kind of stone set by Christie's in May, and the winning bidder wants to remain anonymous. And Nina, I'm just dying to find out who that winning bidder is, but it's those confidentiality agreements that Sotheby's has signed. They cannot tell us. We do know that it was an Asian collector. That's all we know.
Yeah, you've also got to wonder what they're going to do. Are they going to wear it? Use it as an expensive paperweight, perhaps? It is huge, 113 carats. Wow. Coming up next, though, on the show, Christoph Franz, the CEO of Lufthansa, answers his critics. They say that he's leaving halfway through the restructuring that he engineered for Europe's largest airline group. Full details straight ahead.
Africa Business Profiles, in association with Energy Group.
By nature, Africans, like other people elsewhere, are very aspirational. They want to improve their livelihoods. They want to become business people. They want to make more money. They want to have choice. So they do not want to be told, you will use this seed, you will use this technology. They want to be given choice. We have a tendency globally just to come and instruct people and tell them what to do and show them how to do it. But we've learned that our approach of inclusive innovation, our approach of saying no one entity can solve the challenges that we face, but collaboration with NGOs, with communities, with academia, with other companies. Through this collaboration, we are able to really make science more relevant and solve local problems.
The Taliban tried to kill her for going to school. They only made her stronger. Her name is Malala, and she talks to CNN's Christiane Amanpour. Her story, her future, her dreams. The bravest girl in the world, Monday on CNN. CNN original series, Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, Copenhagen.
Denmark is like the happiest place on earth.
Go on a culinary adventure through one of the best restaurants in the world.
Yes,
Pushing you to rethink what's edible.
it's like I've never tasted a green vegetable that good.
Where it comes from.
Let's grab a bunch of these for lunch, no?
And how it reflects the Danish landscape and culture.
Cheers.
Anthony Bourdain, Parts Unknown, Copenhagen, only on CNN. Tonight on CNN, International Desk with Hala Gurani, followed by Amanpour. Then CNN News Center with Aisha Sasay. It's your new evening lineup, tonight on CNN.
Welcome back to World Business Today. Let's turn now to weather. And after striking Okinawa on Monday, Typhoon Danas is now headed for Korea and mainland Japan with strong winds and also heavy rain. Meteorologist Ivan Cabrera joins us live from the CNN Weather Center with more details. So, Ivan, how bad is it getting?
Not as bad as, of course, what we had in Okinawa, which, of course, at that point, the storm was close to peaking here with Category 4 winds. And in fact, we got very close to the 193-kilometer-per-hour winds, 155. This is what's already happened. And I want to take you first, then we'll get to the forecast there, and specifically for Korea and mainland Japan. But let's get you inside the typhoon. This is video from James Reynolds as he was filming as this thing came through. The eye wall essentially went right over them there. Just incredible scenes of just sheets. Look at that. Just sideways rain there. Just incredible force. As you can see there, just things just flying all over the place. Again, 193-kilometer-per-hour winds. That was the anemometer. That's what we clocked there. The satellite estimates were a little bit higher than that, but there you have it. Just incredible force. Now, those scenes will not be repeated for Korea, neither for mainland Japan, because behind me you can see the storm has weakened significantly as was forecasted here. We're barely now at typhoon threshold 119, and you got a tropical storm. And mainly, I think that's what we're taking a look at here. Tropical storm force conditions for South Korea and for portions of Western Japan. All of this heading into the Sea of Japan with heavy rain, as it will be remembered here as a rain event, not so much wind, which, of course, it will be remembered across the Ryukyu Islands. So there's the forecast, this thing racing off to the north and east over the next 24 hours, and then we'll say goodbye to Danas. But, as you know, the season has been very busy. Look at what's already happened with the last storm, Fito. The winds, the rains, that has also subsided, but now we have a new storm that, this one here is getting going. I think we're already very close to a tropical depression here. If you're watching us from the Philippines, this one is for you. We had China, the last one hit Okinawa, and now this one looks like headed right for Luzon with heavy rainfall and gusty winds over the next couple of days. We'll keep you posted as soon as this gets a name. We'll let you know.
Okay, it really looks like a big one. Okay, thank you very much for following that. We appreciate it, Ivan. Nina, over to you.
Thanks so much, Pauline. Well, the CEO of Lufthansa recently announced that he's going to be leaving Europe's largest airline group for instead the Swiss drugs maker Roche. Many have asked why this man, Christoph Franz, would go right in the middle of the company's biggest overhaul, one that he himself initiated. Well, Lufthansa recently announced its largest aircraft order ever of some 59 Airbus and Boeing wide-body jets that will cut the company's fuel costs. It's all part of hundreds of changes that this firm is making in its, quote, SCORE programme. Richard Quest has those restructuring details, and he also spoke to Franz about the outlook for Lufthansa.
Cutting the number of planes
the types of planes, making it simpler, cheaper, more efficient and more effective. It's restructuring the long-haul and the short-haul routes across the network. It's got a new labour agreement, and its subsidiary, Germanwings, is now the backbone of its European network, aiming to compete with EasyJet, Ryanair, Wizz, and the other low-cost carriers. Christoph Franz joined me from Frankfurt earlier, and I asked him about his decision not to stay at Lufthansa and why he's leaving halfway through when the job may not be fully done. Is it a fair criticism?
First of all, it's clear that with regard to CEO position, there's never the right moment. Second, you cannot prepare. So these things, at least if you take the decision deliberately, these are always a surprise. And third, in the case of our Lufthansa way forward, I feel that in the end of May next year, when I'm leaving the company, we will have reached a very important milestone with regard to the change program, with regard to the investment decisions, and with regard also to our strategy to defend our market position.
All the legacy European carriers have had this fundamental battle. On the one hand, competing against the low-cost carriers with their lower cost base. On the other hand, long-haul, the new Gulf 3. Do you feel that the European legacies have turned the corner and have got, if you like, a workable model to compete on these two very different fronts?
Basically, I feel that we are on our way, and with a different speed and different ways of finding solutions, it has become quite obvious that all the big guys are not in a position to leave the marketplace, but we have to reinvent ourselves. And this is exactly the way forward of the Lufthansa Group, by redefining the way how we are addressing point-to-point traffic in Europe. We have decided to use the existing low-cost platform, Germanwings, and to basically triple it in size. And on the other side, we are heavily investing into quality, heavily investing into new aircraft, and heavily also redesigning the formula of our products in the long-haul business.
Well, that was the Lufthansa outgoing CEO, Christoph Franz, sounding pretty optimistic, I might say, about the future of the airline that he's about to leave fully.
Well, Nina, another record has been broken in Hollywood.
Hit. Explore. Do you read? Explore. Over. Explore.
Warner Brothers blockbuster Gravity proves to be a rocket at the box office. We've got the numbers coming up next.
Perspectives, new ideas, new voices. QF Radio. Find your frequency.
The new outer space thriller Gravity has lifted off to a stellar opening weekend. The film took in a dizzying amount, more than $55 million in the U.S., and set a new October opening weekend record. And it was the best ever debut for its stars, Sandra Bullock and George Clooney. But what do real astronauts think about this film? Jeannie Most talks to a spaceman who's been there.
Who better to review the movie Gravity than a guy who doesn't just talk the talk, but has actually walked the spacewalk?
What you see in the movie is kind of like a bad day, not just a bad day, but a bad day on steroids.
On his 2 flights into space, Mike Massimino never had debris crash into him, as Sandra Bullock does. instead of being flung into space.
I can't breathe.
Mike's spacewalks were like a slow dance.
You still have me, hopefully? I got you.
Not a body slam. But when it comes to realism,
I was really excited when I saw the accuracy of my telescope and payload bay and tools. I was like, I wasn't really looking at Sandra Bullock at all, sorry. I recognized my wire cutter.
what Mike did not recognize was Sandra's heavy breathing.
You're burning oxygen.
Stop panting.
That's not helpful. No, that is not helpful. When you're breathing heavy, you're using more oxygen.
Maybe it freaks you out to see Sandra untethered, floating off into blackness.
Anybody, please copy.
Yeah, and I didn't like that idea either.
Astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson nitpicked via Twitter, noting that nearly all satellites orbit Earth west to east, not east to west, as in the film. And he pondered why Bullock's hair and otherwise convincing zero-gravity scenes did not float freely on her head, as even Mike's short hair did.
Kind of poofs a little bit.
The real astronaut doesn't quibble with Sandra Bullock's spacesuit. It's what's under her spacesuit that wasn't so realistic.
The undergarments were not accurate, but again, it's a movie.
And which would you rather see, Sandra Bullock in boy shorts or the fancy long underwear with tubing that real astronauts wear under their spacesuits? While the movie astronauts were having their tethers severed, the worst thing that happened to Mike was a hole in his glove.
Yeah,
so then you started going,
No panting.
Mike says he misses being up in space, and the movie reminded him of being there.
For me, yeah, but I'm just an astronaut. I'm not a movie critic, but I give it a thumbs up.
Just an astronaut. An astronaut more worried about holes in his glove than holes in the plot. Ginny Mo's CNN, New York.
Gravity certainly making itself felt on the European markets today. Look at these markets still in the red this week as the US government shutdown and, more worryingly, the debt ceiling continues to dominate the agenda here. Disappointing trade data for Germany and also France, not helped by disappointing trade data, manufacturing data in China as well. And Pauline, as you and as I know, we had a guest on earlier on World Business Today saying that if Germany is looking towards China to sell more of its goods, well, the export figures for August today certainly aren't good.
Yeah, well, exactly. And following on that aviation or space theme, we got a little bit of a lift off here in the Asia-Pacific region, Nina, with the Nikkei up by about 1/3%. The Shanghai Composite opened after a week-long holiday, playing a little bit of catch-up there, up by more than 1%. And as Nina had mentioned, that data out of China, HSBC released services PMI for the month of September. It was down to 52.4 in September from 52.8 in August, which was a disappointment, but it was still well above the 50 threshold, which indicates expansion. The main Aussie benchmark down for the day, down by 0.25%. And that is all for both of us here on World Business Today. I'm Pauline Chu in Hong Kong. Thanks for joining us.
Northern China reduce its reliance on coal-fired heating plants and prevent 60 million tons of CO2 emissions? When Emerson takes up the challenge, it's never been done before, simply becomes, consider it solved. Emerson.
This month on CNN Go, plunge into Dubai. From palm-shaped islands to the world's tallest building.
It's just absolutely amazing.
We travel through desert landscapes and dine at one of the world's finest restaurants. Explore the glitz and glamour of Dubai in a luxury edition of CNN Go.
Wednesday on CNN. In association with Korean Air.
Game-changing designs. Tech talk with top innovators. CNN.com/.